Hey, everybody, and we're not doing a full podcast episode today. The fights start here in like 3.5 hours on ESPN Plus, the UFC fights tonight. So what I wanted to do was just kind of run through my picks for the main card and then talk about a little bit about the undercard. So some news first. Carl Robertson was supposed to fight Marvin Vettori in a middleweight bout, but Robertson comes in 1.5 pounds overweight and then gets transported to the hospital. So some issues that appear to be related to weight cutting. They're saying that it's not related to COVID-19 right now. So that fight is off. And now you got two fights that bump up to the main card, which admittedly I didn't like watch anything on these guys because I was only preparing for the main card. I mean, I've obviously seen Michael Johnson and Andrei Arlovski fight, right? But the other two guys I honestly don't know a whole ton about. I think they're relatively this might be Linz's first UFC fight. And then Thiago Moises, I think he's had a couple when he came up. I remember him in the Contender Series, but yeah, they got bumped up to the main card, and Vettori and Robertson are off. And then the rest of your main card rounds out with Ricky Simón versus Ray Borg, Hernandez versus Dober, Ben Rothwell versus Ovin St. Preux at heavyweight, and then Anthony Smith versus Glover Teixeira in your main event at light heavyweight, number 4 versus number 8. So good night of fights lined up, right? Let's get through. Let's talk about Michael Johnson versus Thiago Moises first, right? Like I said, don't have a ton that I've seen on Thiago Moises. He seems to be very aggressive and come forward. But you got to remember, man, Michael Johnson is a vet, and I think he's going to have a pretty distinct hand speed advantage in this. And this is Thiago Moises' like I said, like third or fourth fight maybe in the UFC. And Michael Johnson's fought some of the best in the world. So I'm leaning towards Johnson in this fight. I think it's kind of one of those ones where he's been on a little bit of a slump lately and people are starting to doubt him. But, I mean, Michael Johnson, when he's on, is one of the best lightweights in the world. So I'm taking Johnson in that one. Arlovski versus Felipe Lins. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But I believe this is going to be Lins's UFC debut. And he's going up against a legend. But heavyweights are a little bit different, right? Because, like, Lins has a bunch of knockouts on his record, man. Some serious power. He's coming in here with the advantage of youth. And I think in order for Arlovski to win this fight, he's going to have to rely pretty heavily on slowing it down and leaning on his experience. Popping the jab out there, like I said, just slowing the pace of the fight down and making it happen at the rate that he wants it to happen at, as opposed to letting Lins control the action, push forward, and turn things aggressive, right? The problem is when you have a big, powerful guy like Felipe, who probably is going to be coming forward, and it's his UFC debut, he's going to be excited. Early on, that makes him very dangerous. I think as the fight starts to wear on, that knockout power is going to fade from, like, it just won't be there anymore for Felipe, and I think Arlovski will be able to take over. That being said, I mean, Arlovski is not exactly immune to being knocked out. Lins, like I said, he's on a hot streak right now. I'm taking Felipe in this fight, but if you're confident in Arlovski's ability to gauge the distance and kind of, keep Felipe at bay early on and start to control the fight, which, I mean, is possible. I don't see it happening in this one, but Arlovski's a vet, man, very creative, very crafty, and you might see him kind of piece Felipe up tonight. So if you're looking to bet on an underdog, I don't think Arlovski's a terrible underdog, man. A lot of the times he struggles against these, like, immensely talented guys, right? Like I think about him being knocked out by Ngannou and shit, right? And Jairzinho. But sometimes when these new guys come in, you'll see the veteran kind of take over and, like I said, lean on their experience to get the win. So he's a plus 150 underdog tonight. So if you're feeling confident in his ability to get it done, he's not a bad bet. Ricky Simón is fighting Ray Borg, and this is a fight where I think a lot of this fight is just simply going to boil down to whether Ray Borg is going to be able to control Ricky Simón, because Ricky Simón is very explosive. He moves a lot. Like I said, a lot of movement, whereas, like, so much of Ray Borg's wrestling game and stuff is relying on controlling people, and it's going to be a matter of, is he going to be able to get Ricky Simón down, and not just get him down, but keep him there. If you keep seeing Ricky Simón get back to his feet throughout the fight, I think that's going to wear on Ray Borg, and you'll start to see Ricky take over. I like Ricky in this fight. I think he has a speed advantage. He has a little bit of an aggressiveness advantage, and I think that he's just much more explosive than Borg, and it's going to allow him to escape some positions that he wouldn't otherwise. Like, it's tough because Ray Borg is so good at controlling things. Like, to me, that's the big question going into this fight. And again, Ray Borg, according to Bovada, where I'm looking right now, is a plus 135 underdog. So again, he's not a bad one to bet money on. But I do like Ricky Simón in this fight. Like I said, I'd like for him to come forward and kind of, I think, rely on his boxing. And I think it'll be hard for Ray Borg to not only get Ricky Simón down, but to keep him there. So if you start seeing Ricky Simón spending a lot of time on his back or on the mat, that's especially early in the fight, that might be an indicator of how things are going to go. But if you start seeing him exploding out of stuff, he might be able to start taking over, because trying to secure those takedowns and hold a guy like Ricky Simón, who, like I said, a lot of quick movements and stuff, that can be exhausting. So, yeah, I think the first round is potentially going to be very telling of how this fight is going to go. But I like Ricky Simón to take over with the boxing. Like I said, Ray Borg, again, though, not a bad bet. This next fight on the card is maybe the most intriguing of the night to me. It's a fight between Drew Dober and Alexander Hernandez at lightweight. Alexander Hernandez, obviously, on a tear, streaking through guys, comes in and calls out Cowboy and fights Cowboy. And I mean, started the fight off well, but eventually, I mean, it's Donald Cerrone, man. Again, like we talked a little bit earlier about like veterans versus these young up-and-coming guys and how they can sometimes just take over a fight with their experience. That's kind of what happened when Cowboy was fighting Alexander Hernandez. As Hernandez started to blow off some steam, Cowboy started to take advantage of it and started applying the pressure and landing some more accurate shots on Hernandez before eventually getting the finish. And then you saw in the next fight that Alexander Hernandez had against Francisco Trinaldo, picked up a win but was much more hesitant. And, he's got to be thinking in the back of his head, man, Trinaldo's a great counter puncher, and I just fought this guy, and I especially had trouble. I was getting tagged when I was coming in on stuff. I was a little bit sloppy with my entries. So, of course, he's going to be hesitant, right? The problem is that it's tough when you got a guy like Alexander Hernandez, especially when it seems like from my point of view and like what I've seen in this fight, that he's going through something like this, because Alexander Hernandez fights so well when he is moving forward and when he is being aggressive. Like, that's part of who he is. So he has to find some sort of balance, right? Like, he has to learn how to apply, I like to call it calculated pressure. It just can't be reckless, and you can't be throwing strikes with these, they can't all be thrown with bad intentions. And yes, sometimes it works, but when you start getting to the higher levels, and especially when you start fighting guys like he found out against Cowboy, but especially if you're fighting a guy like Drew Dober, who has legit kickboxing experience. He's a southpaw, so that's going to be a little bit of a different look for you here. He's got some serious power when he throws his strikes, and, I mean, he's not going to be afraid to sit down and trade with you. So it's going to be a tough one for Hernandez, because I do think that Dober is going to sit down on things and try to tag Hernandez when he's coming in. And I'll tell you what, man, if you start seeing Drew Dober put the pressure on, I think he's going to pick up a win. I don't think Alexander Hernandez is really meant to fight off the back foot, and I think Dober's going to take this fight over and eventually pick up the win. I think his striking is really crisp, and I think he's just going to be able to get the timing down against Hernandez, who relies a little bit more on, like I said, those quick. It's just a matter of where Hernandez's headspace is at. I think Dober has to make him pay for coming in and try to find those openings on Hernandez's entries. He has to try to find. He has to be able to place those shots when Hernandez is coming in aggressive. And the key for Hernandez is he's got to be more creative and not so predictable with those entries, right? Like, if he's going to go in and fight aggressive, he has to find more creative ways to land things and maybe, mix it up more. This is a really interesting fight, but I like Drew Dober in it. I think this is going to go the distance, but both guys definitely have potential to end it at any time, but I like Dober in a decision. I think this is going to be a fight that primarily takes place on the feet. But don't forget, man, Drew Dober, he's got solid jiu-jitsu as well. Like you saw, I mean, he got tapped out, obviously, by Beneil Dariush, but you saw him escape mount and stuff. Like, it's not like he's not going to be well-versed on the ground. I mean, he's got Elliot Marshall and stuff in his corner, right? So, I mean, he's gonna be okay there. So don't be surprised. Dober, I think, is going to be a little bit bigger and stronger, so don't be surprised if you see Dober start pushing things up against the cage. I like Dober, though, decision. But like I said, either guy could end it. All right, next is a heavyweight bout between Ben Rothwell and Ovince St. Preux. This is tough because it's Ovan's first move up to heavyweight to fight somebody here, right? I think he came in at like 240. And you got to remember that Ben Rothwell is a big guy, man. A big guy. And he's been at heavyweight his whole career. He's fought some of the best at heavyweight. And Ovan's, man, a lot of his wins come via submission. I mean, don't get me wrong. He knocks guys out and stuff, but he's obviously famous for the Von Flue choke. And Ben Rothwell is really sneaky with his submissions and stuff. So he's got really good jiu-jitsu as well. I think he's going to have a size advantage. Another one where, like, I look at the odds and Ben Rothwell is listed as a plus 105. Like, I think that's a good bet right there. I think Rothwell takes this fight. I think OSP could win, but he's going to have to get off early and not let Ben start putting pressure on him, because Ben will attack you from really weird angles. He does like to pressure you. It's kind of hard to time where his shots are coming from. But the advantage of that for OSP is if he's precise and calculated and sticks to the fundamentals, he should be able to find openings. It's just going to be a matter of whether he's going to be able to keep, like I said, if he can't keep Rothwell off him, it's going to be a problem. And I think there's a lot of unknowns. I think it's going to be interesting to see what OSP's power looks like here, and if Rothwell's going to respect it or if he's going to be able to walk through it. I think that's what a lot of it will boil down to. Also, just how OSP decides to fight, man. And I think a lot of this was due to weight cutting, but you'll watch him sometimes and you're like, man, he looks really fucking good. And then other times you watch him and you go, man, he looks a little bit sluggish, like he's not all there. So the hope is that he moves to heavyweight and that kind of goes away and that we can expect the best OSP we've ever seen, right? That's what we're hoping for. But I think that Ben Rothwell, just being a long-time heavyweight, spending his whole career there, fighting the best, I think he's going to kind of disrespect OSP early on. It'll be hard for OSP to get off to a good start, and I think you'll see Ben Rothwell pick up a finish in the second round in this fight. Like I said, for OSP, to me, it's going to be a matter of, can he make Ben Rothwell pay for applying the pressure, and can he make him respect the power? If so, OSP is well-rounded enough. Like he's got good striking, man. I think he'll be a little bit faster than Rothwell. So if he can keep him off him and start turning the tide a little bit, I think he can take over. But I think it's going to be a tough challenge to overcome. And this is a tough first fight at heavyweight for OSP. And finally, moving on to the main event between Anthony Smith and Glover Teixeira. I mean, Glover Teixeira, obviously a longtime veteran, but so is Anthony Smith. And to me, it's just hard not to give Anthony Smith this fight, because you know that he's a legit grappler, very good on the ground. And you got to think that that's where Glover's wheelhouse is going to be. They're in like dirty boxing and the clinch and stuff, right? And Anthony Smith is a pretty long guy. I think he's going to be able to dot Glover up. And, you know, I think there will be moments in this fight where they get into some interesting scrambles and stuff. And you're going to have to see like Anthony Smith's takedown defense tested and, you know, maybe some of his submission defense. Like, I don't think Anthony Smith is going to get out of this thing with just like a free pass where he just goes out and fucking rocks. He might. I mean, he's definitely got power in his hands. I just think that Glover is going to turn it into sort of a dirty fight, and you're going to have to see Anthony Smith go through a little bit of adversity. But I think for the most part, he's going to control the fight, control the range, and roll and just wear Glover out over the course of the first few rounds. And then I think you'll see him pick up a finish in probably the fourth. I think Smith is just going to be able to control things for the most part, and eventually he'll get to that breaking point where he can really pour it on Glover and get him out of there. So, that's all for the main card, but I did want to talk about another good bet that I'm looking at on Bovada. Please don't go placing massive amounts of money based on my advice. Like not smart. But if you're looking at the prelims, I'm looking at the fight between Hunter Azure and Brian Kelleher, and Brian Kelleher's a plus 155 underdog. And it's not that Hunter Azure isn't very good, it's just that he's less experienced. And Brian Kelleher has fought some really world-class talent, man, and looked good doing it. So Brian Kelleher, not a bad bet. Some of the bets that I like is if you're going to bet on the underdog. And again, I'm not guaranteeing any of these, okay? But I like Brian Kelleher at plus 155. I like Ray Borg at plus 135. And then I like Ben Rothwell at plus 105. I mean, he's a slight underdog, but I kind of thought those odds would be the other way when this fight came out. But either way, should have a pretty interesting night of fights on our hands. And let me know who you guys think is going to win down in the comments. trying to think if there's anything else. I think that's it. I think that's going to wrap this one up. I mean, this one 15 minutes. Maybe I will just turn it into a podcast episode, It might just be easier that way. So anyway, for those of you who are tuning in on YouTube right now, this is also available on Spotify, Google Play Store, iTunes, wherever you get your podcast from, this is available. And then if you're listening to the audio version right now, you can also obviously find us on YouTube. So yeah, I think that's going to do it for today. Looking forward to the fights tonight. And thank you everybody for tuning in. Bye-bye.